Good evening, MVLA students and parents. My name is Daphne Adler, and I'm one of the counselors at Los Altos High. This session is Introduction to International Study, and I'm so happy to share this information with you. If this is not the session that you intended, you can go back into the Countdown to College main website and find your correct session. And we are so happy to host this event jointly between our two high schools tonight. So we will go ahead and get started. Just a couple things to note. I have some back-to-back sessions, so we'll be ending right at 6:30 tonight. And there's a lot of information, so I apologize in advance. I'll be running through it fairly quickly and there won't be a lot of time for questions, but feel free to contact me after. So we will get right into it. All right. So why study internationally is a great question. International study is still fairly new-ish and not super well known for American families. And there are a lot of myths around it, like it's kind of complicated, really vague, kind of a mystery, and surely must cost a fortune. And I am here tonight to tell you that those things are not true. I love this topic. It is my favorite thing to talk about these days in counseling, because there is so much really great stuff to know about this and a lot of benefits and advantages to consider when students are applying. So these are some of the main things. So students really benefit from exploring the world and experiencing different cultures around them. They learn really quickly how to function as independent adults. They can be exposed to a wide variety of educational professional opportunities that is really different than the US in a lot of cases. Also, employers are increasingly asking for international experience as students are graduating from college and pursuing their first jobs in their career field. And a really nice perk is that for some institutions that are pretty in our home countries, it is quite a bit easier to get in for international students. And many universities around the world may not be as well known here until students start to do some research, but are actually world renowned, world ranked, which is pretty amazing. Okay, and then in terms of programs, a lot of different options. So what I'm focused on this evening is students studying their full undergraduate degree outside of the US, which would be between 3 and 4 years typically, but there are also other ways. So if students are interested in this idea, but are like, oh, I don't know if I want to commit my entire degree, or there are parts of the American experience that they really want to have, then they don't have to do the full degree, but in and of itself is pretty great. So other ways would be enrolling at an American university and doing the kind of the more common semester or year or summer program abroad. And many universities here have partner agreements, all kinds of different ways that students can go abroad. So it does not have to be like all or nothing. Also, many American universities have campuses abroad, and that has been increasing over the years, and also grad school. So if a student wants to stay domestic for their undergraduate degree, they can most definitely do graduate school abroad. Also, some interesting things to note that are a little bit different than in the US, and again, are pretty great opportunities. In the US, to apply to professional programs like medical school, veterinary medicine, dentistry, law, pharmacy, things like that, that require, like 7 to 8 years of university here. In many countries around the world have what's called direct entry, meaning students go from day one into that program. So they're not doing like separately an undergraduate and graduate and applying twice and taking potentially 2 sets of exams and all of that. They go right into their program. There are typically more steps to apply and often special exams to apply into those programs, but students would do it one time and finish much sooner. It's going to typically be 5 to 6 years. And of course, there's research to be done about specific universities and programs and country requirements and transferring it back here. But very often it can be done. So really exciting, students get out into their profession a lot sooner. Other things, 3+1 or 4+1 dual degree programs, which result in bachelor and master's together. That is possible to find in the US, but is not like a norm necessarily. And in countries like Ireland and in the UK, super common, super easy to do. And also another way to make it a 4-year program is to add on either a study abroad year. So that could be like in another country, or even could potentially be back here in the US, kind of reversing the typical study abroad experience, or could be a professional placement in their field of study. And that's not like fetching coffee for someone. It's actually working in their profession that they're going to go into. So really valuable professional experience upon graduation. And also there's something called a foundation year in the UK, which is an extra year up front for students who maybe miss the mark just a little bit meeting requirements. A university may offer that extra year, so that would make it again a 3+1. So lots of different variations. Students can do really a lot of different combinations, and they don't have to know that up front, so they can kind of customize as they go. Okay, and what can you study? This is a really common question because sometimes students think that you would go abroad to study just like literature or history or archaeology. And actually you can study absolutely everything in the same spectrum that you can in the US. STEM programs, as we know, especially in California, are so selective, so difficult these days to get into. And students can be accepted into very comparable programs abroad. Again, much easier. And it's not that, the difficulty of being accepted is not a reflection on the university. I want to be super clear about that. It's just very different systems. Many universities grow along with the demand, whereas US universities are not necessarily doing that. So they just become more and more selective and accept fewer students compared to the number of applications that they're getting. Abroad, most schools don't actually have quotas the way that we do here. So there's not as much of the selectivity, and so it's quite reasonable to get into a lot of great programs within STEM or non-STEM. Typical programs are going to be like very comprehensive, very hands-on, state-of-the-art facilities, just like here. Campuses are constantly building and innovating their campuses. And students who are going into things like humanities or arts have like an amazing amount of history around them, which we just don't have in the US, being still a relatively new country. So when students go somewhere, for example, in Europe or in Asia or anywhere that they would like, there's really so much history around them to consider, and it's part of the experience. And lastly, interdisciplinary programs. I am seeing more and more every year as I learn more about this. There are some really, really interesting interdisciplinary programs that are combining like different fields in STEM or STEM and humanities, things like that. Like I'm seeing a lot with data science, for example, combining, it could be data science and international relations, or data science and engineering, or computer science, things like that. So really, really neat combinations that are, emerging here as well, but really quite common abroad. All right. And this is really important to consider. This is an amazing experience for the right student. So just like in the US, we frequently talk about what's the right fit. Fit is so crucial no matter where a student is going to to figure out where they want to be, what do they want around them, what kind of city, geographic location, size of the school, all these factors, exactly the same abroad, except a whole other layer of being farther from home, potentially surrounded by different languages, surrounded by a lot of diversity, a lot of different cultures. And so there are additional things to take into account. If a student is independent, adaptable, they're okay with kind of ambiguous situations that they can problem solve, they're willing to take healthy risks, they're comfortable communicating with adults and strangers, and they're going to be okay far from home. These are qualities that help to make students successful, as well as wanting a different experience, something kind of unique. They want to be immersed in a culture, Perhaps they're pursuing a globally oriented major like business, international relations, of course. And in our ever more global world, it's connected in so many ways. Really, in any field, there's a benefit to having an international perspective. And then lastly, students who have either dual citizenship or language proficiency in another language, that opens up a whole other piece that that's available to them. And I did mention in the beginning, students can really study in English almost everywhere. There are options almost everywhere. It does not have to be in an English speaking country. So really pretty cool. On the flip side of that, there are some challenges. So as wonderful as international study is, I don't want to paint it as like, all rainbows all the time. There are challenges. It is far away. Students do have to work through things on their own that, potentially parents would be able to help them with if they were home. And so there are some situations where it may not make the most sense right away. And that doesn't mean never. It means maybe not right now, depending on what a student is going through. So these are some reasons why a student may want to reconsider or wait. Studying far from home just overall can be hard. And if a student maybe hasn't been away from home before or has a hard time being away from parents right now, again, maybe wait or do a shorter semester kind of thing, like their third year in college. Student life is different. Almost all universities are going to have some kind of student life in terms of clubs and organizations and the things that we have here for fun on college campuses, but it is going to look different. They don't have typically like Greek life. They don't have college athletics in the way we have it here, like no March Madness there, but they do absolutely have sports opportunities. So it really depends what students are looking for in their day-to-day lives. Another challenge sometimes is if a student does not know their major, it is very difficult to go in undeclared. That doesn't really happen in most other places. There can be exceptions here and there, but largely students do need to know what they're studying, at least in a general sense. There are certainly going to be some more flexible options, but like if they know they're going into biology, and there might be some slight opportunities to make changes, but then if they want to go from biology to music, possibly would have to start over, that sort of thing. So it's generally best / necessary to know what they're going to major in. And then I alluded before to some of these conditions where students might want to wait, like being far away. And then also students who are going through either physical or mental health conditions at the moment, or approaching graduation that require monitoring or active treatment, might not be the right time. But this is really different for everyone, and students and parents have to make the best decision that's right for their family. All righty. Switching gears a little bit. So we're going to talk about employment. Another common question is, sure, sounds great, but am I going to be able to get a job later? Is my degree going to transfer? In terms of degrees transferring, the very large majority of the time, yes. And that's where research is super important. I cannot tell you that unconditionally every single degree is going to transfer. I'm sure that there are exceptions to that. But the large majority at accredited universities across the world, degrees will transfer from. There may be additional requirements. For example, if a student is trying to work in a field requiring licensing or any kind of national exam or credentialing, like for example, medicine coming back here, teaching coming back here, law, things like that. And then there are also exceptions to that. For example, in Ireland, University of Limerick has a reciprocation agreement with the state of New York, where students can practice law without any additional bar exam. So pretty cool. So there are a lot of different ways that can look, but the general answer is yes, but always requiring research. As I mentioned before, international experience is becoming more desirable to employers. So that is a great thing for students to have on their resume, and also a really neat conversation piece. So if you imagine a student comes back here and they want to work, for example, in our area in tech of some variety, employers are getting tons of resumes, and nothing against UCs or any US schools, but they're getting, a lot of resumes that are like UC, CSU, different private colleges, et cetera. They're all great schools. they're also very common. And again, not to say it's bad, but when a resume comes across the desk of an employer that says University of Glasgow or University of Limerick or University College Dublin or University of Melbourne, Temple University, Japan. It's like, oh, well, that's kind of different and interesting. It's already a conversation starter right away. And they're going to very likely assume traits about that student that are quite positive, like they're adaptable, they're flexible, they're adventurous, they're mature, they can handle themselves, they can problem solve, all desirable qualities for employers. So really good things to consider. Also, a lot of countries will offer what they call a stay back visa, which allows the student to stay in the country where they studied for 1 or 2 years, and then potentially could get sponsored for a job there by an employer. And students are also building a lot of soft skills as they're navigating all of this, between their education abroad and if they do stay on to work abroad as well, they're interacting with so many people and really understanding their field and how to communicate and just a different lens on the world that is multicultural, which is super important. And lastly, they're also gaining a lot of connections. Companies are so global now that even if a student's making connections in another country and then they want to come back here, very often offices are working together, countries are working together. And as we know on LinkedIn, tons and tons of different connections where you can find people where you need them. It's just like a really neat way to think about, being an alum and how to connect with people. All right. So if you're thinking like, great, I'm on board, awesome, how do I do this? It's typically much more transparent than the US admission system, which is really, really refreshing. We know the US system has become so challenging, selective, frustrating, can be really disheartening. This is exactly the time of year that seniors are getting their all their decisions back from universities, and they have put their hearts and soul into these applications, and sometimes things don't work out the way that they would like, and that's how it is in the US. It's not particularly transparent most of the time, and in countries like UK and Ireland, Netherlands, most places in Canada as well, really quite transparent, where they will publish requirements for a given program, and more or less, if a student has those numbers and the requirements that they're asking for, and they write like a pretty decent essay, most of the time they're going to get it. And sometimes there aren't even essays required. So it's in and of itself is a great experience, but also serves as a really thoughtful off-ramp for the US system. Students have a choice of saying, I could do the stressful American system, and or I also can give myself these other choices and have some really cool options in my back pocket that would give me a completely different experience than maybe I've imagined up until now. But hey, this is actually really intriguing. I want to learn more about it. And then they start to find out like they're going to have really, really similar, if not even more enhanced opportunities abroad. So anyway, requirements. It's going to be different. There's rarely going to be an answer for these sorts of things that is a blanket answer for everything. So again, research. Different universities and countries are going to have different requirements and procedures, deadlines, things like that. Sometimes admission criteria are going to be similar to the US because they're trying to appeal to American students. Many countries are trying to recruit international students, and US students are very coveted, so that works in your favor. However, many schools are relying on standardized test scores, which has been the historical norm. COVID changed that, which has been a silver lining, where many universities, even in the UK, which had been quite strict about AP requirements and SAT or ACT, have become more flexible. So it's even a better time in terms of admission to apply. But again, you just have to check what the requirements are, and it's good to plan ahead because many schools do look for some APs, and so students want to plan that out ahead of time so that they have enough time to take the classes they need. Okay, and then admission timelines are later than the US most of the time, which also allows students to continue to work on their requirements through 12th grade. which is again is different than here, where it's like up through 11th grade, and then some schools look at fall semester of the senior year, but never the spring. Okay, I am running low on time, so I'm gonna have to move a little bit faster. Cost, huge factor. People are always waiting for the other shoe to drop on this. Like, it's gotta cost a fortune. You have to be wealthy to do this. No, it's an amazing, more economical option, not to say low cost. So it's not always possible, but is a fraction typically of the amount that it costs to complete an undergraduate degree here in the States. Partly because in many countries, the degree is going to be 3 years. So in most of the UK, except for Scotland, the degree is 3 years. In Australia, New Zealand, it's 3 years. So you're shaving 25% off the top as it is. And the beginning price tag is just simply much lower. And the cost of living is often a lot lower. So you're going to see in a moment some numbers that I was even shocked when I put this chart together earlier this year for a presentation. Just seeing it kind of all lined up is really illuminating. And some universities do have international merit scholarships. Many do accept FAFSA for loans and some financial aid. So there are definitely ways to continue to bring the cost down. Okay, so this chart, sorry, hang on. This chart shows you a whole lot of numbers. I put this together for a presentation as that was part of International University Month in October at Los Altos. And you can see across the bottom, the total cost of attendance. So UC, CSU, Oregon as an example of out-of-state public, which our students of course pay a lot for, US private. And then looking over on the right-hand side at the UK, Ireland, and Japan, I mean, my jaw dropped when I saw these numbers. It's staggering. You can quite literally do a degree abroad for the same cost as UC or CSU. And I've had students say, well, like, why would I bother doing that if I could just stay here? Fair question. You absolutely could if that's what you want. But you could go and have this like incredible adventure for the same amount of money, including travel cost. So it really can be a very comparable option and much, much less than a private school here. And just a little bit of a kind of global perspective here on the map. The most common destination is going to be right up here, UK and Ireland, many, many, many wonderful universities and English speaking. So of course, there's no language issue there, but not the only options. Australia down here as well. And Canada. Canada is going to be a little bit more than the UK, but still less than the US most of the time. All right, and then housing. So this is another difference, which students may or may not prefer. Compared to a dorm here where students have like, they have their room and typically a roommate, usually not their own bathroom, and they're usually going to have a meal plan. Most places abroad are going to be like apartment style. They do often have residence halls, but even within the residence hall, it might be like a suite type of setup where a student has almost always their own room and very often their own bathroom. Like you would have to ask to have a roommate. They like everywhere else thinks it's really strange that we pile students on top of each other into a dorm room of 2 or 3 or 4. Everyone has their own little corner, which is really, really lovely. And then they would have like flatmates and a common kitchen in a common area. And students learn to cooperate. Maybe some students cook and some do the cleanup or do the shopping and they figure out what they want to eat. And so they're really learning how to be like apartment mates, which is adult life. Most universities are going to support students in finding a place. Quite often, universities will guarantee a first-year placement for students. Not always, but it's pretty typical that they will. At the very least, they're going to have some kind of support in finding a place. All right, and then majors. Just a little bit about this. I alluded before to the fact that students often have to know what they want to study. So it depends on the country, depends on the university. And the reason for this in Europe is that in a lot of countries, students are already focused into an area of study or a career track, and so they're applying, knowing what they're studying, and so for American students to filter into their system, that they have to know that as well. There is some flexibility. For example, Scotland has a 4-year system that starts with like a broader range of subjects in the first year, and then students kind of whittle their way to what they want to finish with. And then in Ireland, there's a little bit of flexibility as well. So it really depends. Okay, and then support. So this is super important given that your students are going to be mostly quite far away. So most universities are going to have some kind of international office or international resource center to support students from other countries to get acclimated. They're going to do an orientation. They're going to teach them about the currency and how to open a bank account and how to use the local transportation, things like that, so that they can kind of have a easier adjustment into all those things. And then a physical space for students to gather. And then colleges will often have some kind of international student society as a club or organization. There's typically good mental health support for students who need that. And the admission process itself is really personalized. I can put you in touch with a lot of reps from like a lot of the common colleges that students apply to abroad. Put you in touch with them, and they're very happy to email with you, to be on the phone with you or over Zoom. And they want families to be comfortable with this decision to go abroad. All right, so wrapping up here, I am trying to get all my schools onto one slide, and I have been visiting a lot of schools over the past few years. So I think I've now exhausted the capacity of a slide, unless I want to use tiny font. But these are the international schools that I have been to, a ton in England and throughout the UK, Ireland, and a few other places. So feel free to ask me any questions about these universities. And then I just included some photos so you can get just a little glimpse. My very first international tour was in 2017 in Ireland, and we visited 9 schools. So this is like a sample. And then Scotland a few years ago, and Wales a few years ago, Italy as well. I actually don't have a lot from England on here. And just last month during our February break, I had the amazing opportunity to go to Melbourne, Australia, to visit University of Melbourne, which was super duper cool. So feel free really to come in and chat with me about any of these schools. All right, and just a few more fun pictures. So there's just so much history and culture and just amazing things to see everywhere. All right, so we have somehow, I don't know how that happened. I actually have 3 minutes for questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and do my best to get through as many questions as possible. Any questions? One question. Okay. How hard is it to come back to work in the US? Yes, we were talking about that earlier. So typically is not an issue. Students have to do a lot of research on whatever their degree is. If it's something that requires some kind of licensing or credentialing or further education, or something really specific to the US that they may not get abroad, then there might be like additional things that they would need to do. But for most degrees, it is not a problem to come and transfer their degree and to work in the US. Do some of the schools require specific scores on AP test? Yes, definitely. They will be pretty clear about needing like X number of AP exams of a certain score for a given program. And they typically publish that information, and or you can reach out to the admission rep to find that out. Any other questions? Are there specific schools that work closely with MVLA? Yes, actually. So right after this session, we're going to have a session about applying in the UK, and that is going to be presented by 2 of our really wonderful reps, Emma York from Emma Schwartz from University of York, and Ashley Wormington from University of Glasgow, and they have done a lot of events for us. At Los Altos, I do an event throughout the month of October. That's a series of workshops and webinars that feature a lot of the reps. So a lot from the UK, a lot from Ireland, Australia. There's too many to name here, but you can feel free to send me an email and I can let you know. And also, if you go on the YouTube page for the Los Altos College Career Center, there are tons of videos because for 2 years we did that event all virtual during COVID. So there's a lot of information on there. All right, I can take one last question if anyone has any more questions, and then we'll wrap up. No more questions? Okay. All right. We'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for being with us. This is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch this later. Much appreciated. And I hope everyone has a great evening.